The average rate of success in a cold call right now, according to Gong, is 1.48%. Think about that for a second. That means we have a 98% chance of failure when the prospect picks up the phone and decides to take our cold call. It's a lot of effort, right? On the other hand, what I see from world-class reps is that they have success rates of 30% or higher. And that's from my personal experience in making tons of cold calls myself and also training thousands of reps on the approach that you're going to learn in this course. So that means that 1 out of every 3 prospects they connect with turn into a qualified meeting. I call this the top performer gap. And it's the difference, which is really pretty crazy when you look at it, between an average performing rep and a top performer and how they conduct themselves on a cold call. There's a few things that actually might surprise you. Number 1 is top performers deal with call reluctance. So they get scared to pick up the phone as well, but they do it anyways. Number 2 is they speak more than the prospect. So as a percentage of talk time, usually when I ask reps, how long should you be talking versus the prospect, I usually hear answers like 10%, 20, 30%. And Gong's data actually supports that top performing reps speak more than prospects on cold calls. It's about 55% rep and 45% prospect. Third, they do not pitch or talk about their solution. So they don't lead with a pitch about why they think it would be helpful to have a meeting with them. And they actually make the prospect ask them what their company is and what their solution does. It's pretty interesting. Number 4, they do discovery. So there's a lot of talk on LinkedIn right now, especially if you consume sales content, that discovery calls happen later in the sales cycle and a cold call is not a discovery call. And it's important to know that discovery is not a call. Discovery is an act. It's something we're doing throughout the entire sales process. So on a cold call, yes, you're going to do a tiny bit of discovery. You should ask questions. And it's all about getting the prospect to talk about what they care about. 5, top performers are the first ones to say goodbye. So the ultimate power move on a cold call is for you to cut the call short, not for the prospect to say goodbye. The first thing we're going to cover today is call reluctance. So if you deal with it, totally normal. I'm going to give you some quick tips that you can use to manage your call reluctance and keep it from holding you back from being successful on the phones. Second, we'll talk about how to nail the first impression in the first 30 to 60 seconds of the cold call. Third, we'll talk about what I call the hook. So you're going to learn how to ask powerful questions and engage the prospect. And lastly, we'll talk about how to close and say goodbye. So let's dig in. Let's talk about call reluctance. So you've had it if you've ever felt scared to pick up the phone or maybe procrastinated picking up the phone because you're afraid of what a prospect was maybe thinking of you, or maybe you felt like the person might judge you, or maybe you're one of those people that you're unsure whether cold calling is even effective for you to be doing. Over 80% of reps I work with deal with call reluctance. What I want to give you in this video is a framework called deconditioning, and it's a 4-part framework that therapists, psychologists, all kinds of folks use in the medical field to help people with trauma or to break bad habits and that sort of stuff. There are 4 parts to deconditioning. First, identify the pattern. This is usually the easy part. So the pattern in this case, if we're making cold calls, is, hey, I notice I don't make as many of these calls because I'm kind of scared to pick up the phone. Second, pinpoint the trigger. So this is where things start to get pretty interesting. We want to pinpoint the exact moment in time, and this requires us to be pretty mindful actually while we're doing this activity. And we're going to think about when exactly do we start to experience call reluctance. And I want you to get super specific. So for example, oftentimes I'll hear this is when I'm going through my sales engagement tool, I'm looking through my list of prospects on LinkedIn, I notice the person's profile and I see their job title, it's a chief so-and-so or an SVP, and maybe their picture, they look really serious and intimidating. We start to psych ourselves out. So maybe for you, it's the moment that you see the prospect's info on LinkedIn and you see their job title and you're kind of questioning whether or not to even call them. Maybe it's when you start to actually dial the number into your phone and it's ringing. I want you to pinpoint the exact moment where you start to experience call reluctance. Third, derail and replace. So essentially what we're going to do at this step is we're going to take an existing behavior and derail that and do something different. So with habits, one of the best ways to break a habit is to replace it, not to get rid of it. So if we're looking to stop eating junk food, the goal is not to eat nothing, it's to replace it with something healthier, right? So same kind of thing works here. So I'm going to give you a couple tips here that can help with call reluctance and derailing your existing behavior. I think one is just changing the narrative. So when you think about your self-talk, if you're an SDR, let's say, that goes into a cold call and you tell yourself things like, I'm just an SDR, or why would this person want to talk to me? Or there's no way that they could possibly need our help. I want you to take that inward focus and make it more of an outward focus. So let's focus on the prospect. So when we go to call someone, maybe what we think about is, hey, I wonder if this prospect is very similar to this other customer that we're working with that was dealing with this challenge. Hey, I noticed they have 10 years of experience. I wonder what I could learn from them. So change the narrative, right? Control your self-talk. Another tip I got for you, this one's super simple. This one kind of does the trick for me, is instead of sitting down like this and making your cold calls, try standing up. I happen to be a pacer too, so maybe walking around back and forth in your office, just trying to change your physical state. Another tip is to change the goal of the call. So instead of looking to schedule a meeting, what if we pick something that's a little bit smaller, that's more under our control, and say, my only goal is to start a conversation. So make it something that's smaller, more easily achieved, and I call this conversation over meetings. My only goal going into a cold call is to start a conversation. So those are some tips that you can use to derail and replace. Fourth, practice and make habit. None of what I just shared with you is going to happen overnight. So you need to pick something that resonates with you and start practicing it. So your action from this section is to implement one or two of those tips that you resonate with most. According to Chorus AI, the average cold call lasts only about 80 seconds. So that means that most reps are getting shut down in their opener, and there's a big reason for that, okay? So we want to take advantage of what's called the self-disclosure principle. So to give you an example, I have a therapist. His name is Sam. And what's really interesting about Sam is that I don't really know much about him. I've been working with him for over a year. I know he's got a couple kids. He just moved to Wisconsin. But besides my wife, Sarah, this guy knows everything about my life. And I feel really close to him, even though I don't really know him that well. And it's because I've shared a lot with him. So how does this apply to cold calling? In the first 30 to 60 seconds of the cold call, our goal is to talk very little about ourselves and to get the prospect talking about themselves. That's how we can quickly build rapport in a relationship. This is usually the very opposite approach of how most reps do the first part of the call. They have some sort of intro, and then they go into pitch mode, right? They talk about their solution, and then they ask for a meeting. We're going to do the exact opposite of that. Okay, so there's 3 parts to this. Part number 1, permission-based intro. We're going to ask for permission and get an opt-in from the prospect to see if they would like to participate in the call. Because remember, when we're cold calling the prospect, by definition, they didn't ask us to call them, and the call is unexpected. And this is going to be super simple. A variation that you can use would sound something like this. Hey, David, it's Jason with Outbound Squad. I know I probably caught you in the middle of something, but do you have a minute for me to tell you the reason for my call? And then you can let me know if you want to keep chatting. So we're going to keep it super simple, and notice my tonality as well. My pace, I'm not talking super fast. You saw that I had a big smile on my face. I'm talking slower. I'm really enunciating the words. 90% of the time, you should get a, yeah, sure, go ahead. So if you're not using a permission-based opener, start using one. So part 2, relevance. Now the prospect needs to know why you're calling them in particular. We're going to drop in a reason for why they should continue the conversation, and this needs to be about them, their company, or their role, not about our solution. Now is not the time to talk about us. I'll give you an example. I work with a company that helps with customer support and reducing cost to serve. They're calling people that manage really big contact centers, and the relevance piece might sound something like this. Hey, I noticed on your website that there's a little chat widget at the bottom, and if the customer can't get their question answered through chat, there's a way they can call into the contact center. That's it. That's my relevance statement right there. I'm showing them that I did my homework. That's all I got to say. That's the reason. That provides the context. If you're personalizing cold emails, this is literally repeating what you would put in that first part of the email. Part 3, priority drop. So what's important here is that instead of now pitching my solution, again, resist the urge to pitch. Well, hey, we help contact centers with XYZ solution. I'm calling to set up a meeting. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. I'm going to do the opposite, okay? So I'm going to use what's called customer voice. In this case, what other contact center leaders are focused on right now, and I'm going to ask how that aligns with what the prospect is focused on. And that's going to sound something like this. So, hey, I was on the website. I noticed that you guys had a little chat widget, and then it was redirecting folks to hop on calls with your contact center agents. The reason I was reaching out to you is that in working with other VPs of contact centers, we typically hear a focus around one of 2 areas. One's reducing cost to serve, so getting fewer people to call into the contact center, and to self-serve through chat and FAQ pages. The second thing is more around employee experience. So providing all of the coaching, training, all of that kind of good stuff to keep employees happy and keep them around. How does that resonate with what you're working on right now? So basically what I did there is I talked about things that we help with, but I did it through the lens of a customer and what they're working on. Your action items from this section are 1, start using your permission-based opener. 2, add relevance to your opener. And then 3, start using a priority drop. So think about what your prospects are working on that's in common amongst a lot of your prospects. And those are the things that you're going to mention in your opener. Now that we've nailed our opener, let's talk about the hook phase of the call. The goal of this part is to engage the prospect and create a reason to meet. So if we've done a priority drop and the prospect has said, yeah, sure, I'm totally focused on this specific priority, or maybe I'm focused on all of those. Ideally, we've nailed this part of the call, and now it's time to filter the conversation into an area the prospect is working on. So if we keep using the example I used before with a VP of customer support, let's say they're working on reducing cost to serve. What I want to leverage here is what's called authority bias. And this can work in good and bad ways, but it's essentially our natural inclination to trust people in positions of authority. That's why we trust doctors, because the doctor is in a position of authority when it comes to the subject matter of our health. So in sales, the way that we can use this to our advantage is by sounding like we know what the heck we're talking about, by talking about what other people like them are focused on. Okay? It makes us more of an authority figure on the subject matter. So instead of asking a question that's really open-ended that provides very little context, like, so what are you doing to reduce support costs right now? That doesn't really show the prospect that I know their world. What I want to do instead is front load the question with context. And this gets the prospect thinking about the question in a particular way while also demonstrating that you talk to a lot of people like them. And that's going to sound something like this. Well, hey, I'm curious because I was on your website earlier and saw the chatbot, and one of the things that we're seeing other customers do is point people to FAQ pages. And one of the challenges they often have is that those FAQ pages don't end up answering the customer's question, and they just call into the contact center anyways. How does that compare to your experience? Or another question could be, how do you prevent customers from going to FAQ pages and not getting their questions answered and then calling into the contact center anyways? And hopefully what I've done here is painted a picture of what the common problem is that I'm asking the prospect about and seeing if they deal with something very similar. So I can get them talking about it, and people are often way more receptive to talking about their problems if they know that their peers are having similar problems. Your goal in this section is to craft 2 or 3 really great questions that you can use going into a cold call. Ones where the questions are front-loaded with common problems, and then ask the prospect how they've dealt with it. Now for the close. So this is where we say goodbye. The goal of this part of the call is to secure the meeting and just get the heck out of the prospect's hair. And we're going to do this in a couple different ways. The ultimate power move is for you to be the one to cut the call short and say goodbye and not let the call drag on for too long. So once you've asked the prospect a few questions and you feel good about the conversation, we're simply going to summarize what we heard. And that might sound something like this. Hey, David, so what I heard today is that reducing cost to serve is a really big focus for you guys right now. You've tried FAQ pages, and you don't really have a system that you feel like is good enough to help you determine where people might get stuck and where it causes them to hop into the contact center queue. Is there anything that I missed? I'm summarizing what I heard and inviting the prospect to correct me. And usually what you'll get here is a, yeah, you got it, or they'll correct you. Anything they share here is good. Now we're going to schedule the meeting. And I'm going to ask, hey, do you mind if I make a quick suggestion? And usually you'll get a funny response like, yeah, sure, what's up? And you're going to respond with something like this. Hey, I know I promised I'd be brief today. This is the exact thing that we've been helping other companies like A, B, and C with. How about we unpack that a little bit more when I'm not cold calling you in the middle of your day? Do you have your calendar handy? And that line I love using, it's money. Do you have your calendar handy? And we're just going to go straight into scheduling the meeting. The goal here is to schedule the meeting as close as possible to the time that you made the call. So if today's Wednesday, I want to try to set up that meeting for later today or tomorrow at the latest. I don't want to let it drag on for too long. Time kills all deals, as they say. And in the case of cold calling, time kills conversion rates when getting people to show up to meetings. Lastly, I'm going to do what I call a triple confirmation. This is the power move once you figure out a time with a prospect. It's got 3 parts. Part 1, I'm going to confirm that they received the invite on the call. And I'm going to ask, hey, so I sent that invite over to you for Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Would you mind opening up your email real quick and hitting accept? I want to make sure it didn't go to spam. Part 2, confirm the agenda. So again, we're going to be talking about what you're looking to accomplish in reducing cost to serve in your contact center. We're going to talk about what other customers like X, Y, and Z are doing to solve that same problem. And if there's a fit there, we'll talk to you about how we might be able to help you with it. Part 3, confirm the confirmation process. So maybe you have a process in place where you like to send an email the day before, maybe a text, maybe a call, you send over case studies, resources, whatever it might be. I want to confirm the confirmation process with the prospect. And if I need them to respond back that they got that email, I'm going to let them know that that's what I need them to do. So your action here is to work through the talk track that I just gave you, summarize what you heard, schedule the meeting, and then do your triple confirmation. We've talked about the state of cold calling today and the top performer gap. And one thing I want you to think about is that cold call contact rates are so low. The average pickup rate's about 5% right now. You get so few opportunities to talk to prospects that it's almost not even worth your time doing this unless you can do it at an elite level. So everything we talked about in this course around the top performer gap, what top performers do versus average performers, all of that is extremely critical. And top performers convert cold calls at 20 times the rate of an average performer. So when you think about the things that you need to become a top performer yourself, I want you to think about, do I have call reluctance? Is this holding me back? If so, use some of the tips that we mentioned. Am I making an impactful entrance in the first 30 to 60 seconds of the call? Am I making a great first impression? If not, use some of the permission-based openers, priority drops, all of those things that we talked about. Then think about, do I have a couple of really great questions that I can ask the prospect using that question stacking framework to really engage them? And lastly, do I have an effective way to say goodbye, confirm the meeting, secure it, and then get people to show up? If you're able to do all of these things, I guarantee that you're going to have a very successful career as a sales professional. I'm Jason Bay. Thanks for checking out the course. You can find more on me at Outbound Squad or connect with me directly on LinkedIn.